The morning Elena Vargas drove to Fort Bliss, she stopped twice on the highway, once for gas, once because her hands started shaking on the steering wheel and she needed to sit still for a moment with the engine off and the New Mexico desert stretching flat and pale in every direction around her. She did not think about why her hands were shaking, she already knew. The rifle case on the back seat was olive green and worn at the corners. One of the latches had a small dent in it from a time she had dropped it in a parking lot in Colorado Springs 14 years ago, after a qualifying round that had gone better than anyone expected. The case had belonged to her brother Marco before it belonged to her. He had saved up for 3 months to buy it, carried it everywhere like it was something precious, and then one afternoon he had left it on her porch with a note that said simply, "Keep it warm for me." She had not opened it in 11 years. She drove the rest of the way without stopping. The gate at Fort Bliss was slower than she expected. There were forms, a phone call to someone she couldn't hear, another form, and then a duty officer who looked at her rifle case, and then at her visitor lanyard, and then at the rifle case again, as if one of those things did not belong with the other. "You're here for the marksmanship program," he said. "The donation program," Elena said. "I'm donating equipment." "Right," he typed something. "Sergeant Kowalski will meet you at range 4. She drove across the base slowly, following the yellow signs, past buildings that all looked the same and young soldiers who walked with a particular kind of purpose that she recognized from photographs. Not Marco's photographs. Her own memories of qualifying rounds of bases, of the particular way military people moved through the world like they already knew where they were going. She parked, she sat in the car for a full minute. Then she got out and picked up the case. Sergeant Kowalski was 22 years old, which she had not expected, and he was built in a way that suggested the military had a very specific idea of what it wanted, and had applied that idea thoroughly. He had good posture and a clipboard, and an expression of careful, professional politeness that she had seen before, the kind people wore when they were trying to be respectful of someone they were not sure what to do with. "Ms. Vargas," he said, extending his hand, "thanks for making the trip." "Sure," she said. He looked at the case. "That the rifle?" "Yes. Mind if we take a look at it before we process the paperwork?" She handed it to him. He set it on a folding table and opened the latches 1-2 and stood looking at what was inside for a moment. She watched his face. There was a small shift in it, not surprise exactly, something more like recalibration. "This is a good piece of equipment," he said. "I know." Behind him, across the range, 6 soldiers were setting up at the lanes. They wore the same expression as each other, which is to say they wore no particular expression, but they had noticed her. She could tell by the way 2 of them had turned slightly in her direction while pretending not to. Kowalski closed the case. "We'll need to run a quick verification test before we can log it into inventory," he said. "Someone from our team will." "I can do it," Elena said. He paused. "You want to run the verification?" "I can shoot it," she said. "I know it better than anyone on this base." He considered this for a moment. Behind him, one of the soldiers at the bleachers said something to the person next to him, and both of them glanced over. She caught the tail end of the sound, not the words but the shape of them, the tone. "Okay," Kowalski said carefully. "We'll set you up in lane 7, 25 meters, just to confirm the sights are calibrated." Lane 7 was the beginner lane. She did not point that out. She picked up the case herself and carried it to the lane. Kowalski explained the safety protocol. He was thorough and clear, and he used small words, and he explained it twice. She listened to both explanations with the same expression she used when people gave her directions to places she had been 100 times before, calm, patient, already somewhere else in her head. When he finished, she said, "Thank you." He stepped back. She set the case on the bench and opened it again. The rifle was exactly as she remembered it. She had cleaned it 3 weeks ago before deciding to come here. She had cleaned it in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with the radio on, and at some point she had stopped cleaning and just sat there holding it, and the radio had gone on playing without her. She picked it up now. Her hands remembered before she did. She adjusted her ear protection. She took a long time getting them level, symmetrical. She adjusted them 3 times when once would have been enough, because there was something inside her chest that needed a few extra seconds to settle, and the ear protection was what her hands found to do while she waited. Behind her, someone on the bleachers made a comment. She did not catch the exact words, but there was laughter. The laughter was the kind that expected no response, which was its own kind of comment. She finished adjusting her ear protection. She looked at lane 7, and its target at 25 meters, and she thought about Marco, who had learned to shoot on fence posts and tin cans behind their grandmother's house in Deming, and who had been better than her at 15 and not as good as her at 17, and had spent the rest of his life being fine about it in that particular way he had of being fine about things that cost him something. She turned to Kowalski. "Can I use lane 1?" she said. He blinked. "Lane 1 is 100 meters. I know." A small pause. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you are trying to decide if they are serious or if they need to be redirected gently. Then he looked at the case and at her and back at the case. "Sure," he said, like he was granting a small and harmless request. She walked to lane 1. She did not walk fast or slow. She walked the way you walk to a place you have walked to before, even if you have not been there in a long time. The bleachers went quieter, not silent. There was still talking, still the low sounds of people doing other things, but the quality of the noise changed. The soldiers who knew things about rifles had started to notice the way she was holding hers. She set her feet. She raised the rifle. She made very small adjustments. The adjustments were the kind that took years to learn, not big movements, not dramatic, just tiny corrections that added up to precision. Two of the soldiers on the bleachers had stopped talking entirely. She did not look at them. She breathed out. She fired 5 shots. She counted them herself, not because she needed to, but because that was how Marco had taught her, counting out loud so you knew where you were. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The shots came fast, not reckless fast, but controlled fast, the kind that happens when a body has done something so many thousands of times that it no longer has to think about the doing of it. The whole thing took under 3 seconds. The targets at 100 meters shook, 5 holes tight as a fist, exactly where they were supposed to be. The range went quiet. Not the quiet of people being polite. The quiet of people who have just seen something and are trying to understand it. One of the soldiers lowered binoculars he had raised at some point without her noticing. He lowered them slowly, the way you set something down when you are not ready to put it away, but you know you have to. Kowalski stood very still. Elena put the safety on. She set the rifle on the bench. She picked up her brass casings, all 5 one by one, and put them in her coat pocket. She did this carefully. She did not hurry. She did not turn around. After a moment, Kowalski walked over. He stood beside her and looked downrange at the target, and she let him look. "Where did you train?" he said. His voice was different now. The professional politeness was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. Elena looked at the target. "My brother taught me," she said. Present tense teaches. She felt it as soon as it came out. The word sitting wrong in the air, and her not moving to correct it, because correcting it meant saying the other word, and she had said that other word enough times in the past 11 years that she had gotten very good at finding ways to avoid it. Kowalski waited in case there was more. There was not more. She closed the latches on the case, 1, 2, and the sound of each one was particular and final, like punctuation at the end of something long. She had come here to leave the rifle, to put it somewhere useful, where it would be used, where Marco's savings and Marco's careful months of setting aside money would become something that continued, a clean act. Simple, something that looked from the outside like moving forward. She picked up the case. She was still holding it. She handed Kowalski the yellow visitor's lanyard. She did not explain the tense mistake. She did not explain the 11 years or the Olympic qualification or the morning she had withdrawn from competition without giving anyone a reason that made sense to them. Because the real reason was that competing had felt, suddenly, like something she was only doing because Marco thought she should, and Marco had just gone somewhere she could not follow, and she had not wanted to be the kind of person who kept running a race for someone who wasn't watching anymore. She did not explain any of that. She walked back to her car. The desert afternoon was still and very bright, and her shadow went out long behind her. Kowalski stood at lane 1 for a while after she left. One of the soldiers from the bleachers came over, an older one, Specialist Reyes, who had been in long enough to have seen a few things, and pulled out his phone and typed something into it and looked at the screen. He showed it to Kowalski without saying anything. It was her name in a search result. A news article from 15 years ago, a profile piece, a photograph of a younger version of her face next to a score that Kowalski read twice to make sure he had it right. Olympic trials qualifier, withdrew without explanation. Below that another result, shooting prodigy goes silent. Below that nothing, no competition records, no appearances. Nothing for 11 years, and then today in lane 1, 100 meters, 5 bullseyes under 3 seconds. Kowalski handed the phone back. He looked at the target still hanging downrange. 5 holes tight together, exactly centered. In his 4 years on base, he had seen very good shooters. He had seen a few exceptional ones. He had not seen anything like this come in through the gate with a visitor's lanyard and a worn-out equipment case, and then leave without waiting for anyone to say anything about it. She didn't even look back, Reyes said. No, Kowalski said. He thought about taking the target down. He thought about replacing it with a fresh one before the afternoon session started. That was the normal procedure. Targets got checked and replaced on a schedule, clean surfaces for clean practice. He left it up. Nobody asked him why, and he did not explain it. The afternoon went on around it, soldiers cycling through the lanes, the familiar sounds of the range, the rhythm of a normal training day, and the target stayed there with its 5 holes through the center like a fact that had been stated and then left in the room. In the parking lot, Elena sat in her car with the engine running and the rifle case in the back seat. She stayed like that for a few minutes, long enough for the shaking in her hands to work itself out, which it eventually did, the way it always eventually did. She had not left the rifle. She was going to have to figure out what that meant. She pulled out onto the highway and drove west, into the long flat afternoon, with Marco's case in the back seat and 5 brass casings in her coat pocket, and the desert going by on both sides like it had no opinion about any of it, which was, she thought, one of the better qualities of the desert. She did not stop this time. She drove all the way home.